The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with uneasy murmurs as representatives from across the known universe gathered in the Great Hall. Towering diplomats clicked their mandibles in agitation, reptilian envoys called their tails tightly against their seats, and the synthetic emissaries of the core AI stood motionless, processing the unfolding chaos. A massive holographic projection flickered in the center of the chamber, displaying the less-known transmissions of the Dominion's latest expansion fleet, garbled, desperate voices screaming before being drowned out by static. This cannot be right," a envoy from the Empire muttered, his slitted eyes narrowing. "That fleet was one of the most advanced armadas ever assembled. You expect us to believe they were simply erased?" A deep hum reverberated through the chamber as the delegate, a being composed of shimmering, translucent energy, spoke. "Sensor logs confirm no external anomalies, no gravitational disruptions, no sign of the usual weapons employed by our enemies. And yet, there is something." The hologram shifted, revealing the wreckage of a Dominion warship floating lifelessly in the void. Its hull was scarred with patterns unknown to any species present, long jagged tears in the metal that did not align with conventional munitions. A synthetic envoy of the core AI stepped forward, its smooth metal plating reflecting the dim light of the chamber. "We intercepted partial distress calls. We believe they hold some linguistic anomalies." The hologram distorted again, playing a corrupted transmission. The voice of a Dominion officer, crackling and broken, rang out. "They're here. The myths. The monsters. We should have listened." The message cut off, replaced by a deafening silence that sent a shudder through even the coldest of the delegates. For a moment, no one spoke. The chamber, usually filled with endless debate and political maneuvering, was gripped by something far more ancient: fear. It was the reptilian envoy who finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "The myths. You don't mean humans?" The word itself felt unnatural, as if speaking it aloud might summon them from the void. A wave of murmurs swept the chamber, some scoffing in disbelief, others nodding in grim recognition. "Ridiculous," a towering avian representative from the Wheeler Dominion squawked. "The Terran species vanished thousands of cycles ago. Their planets are abandoned husks, their colonies nothing more than ancient ruins. They are extinct." "And yet," the core AI envoy replied, tilting its head, "the Dominion fleet is no more. And the only evidence left behind is a name spoken in terror." The envoy curled his claws against the marble surface of his podium. "The legends spoke of their brutality, their cunning. They were warriors unlike any seen before, capable of waging war on a scale beyond logic. If they have returned," his voice trailed off, his tail twitching in clear unease. The hologram shifted again, showing the wreckage of another ship. This one was different. Not the Dominion. It bore markings long lost to history. A sigil no one had seen outside of archived records. The banner of old Earth. Gasps rang through the chamber. The Wheeler representative took an involuntary step back. "Impossible." A deep, resonant voice echoed through the hall, belonging to the Supreme Arbiter, the figure of the Council. His aged face was grim. "Legends are not bound by the logic of the present. We have relied on stories to guide us, but we chose to dismiss those that spoke of terror. We buried the warnings and in the arrogance of time. If the humans have truly returned, then we are no longer the rulers of this galaxy." The weight of his words settled upon the assembly. A dozen species, countless empires, all at the peak of their power, suddenly confronted with the possibility that they were mere children playing in the ruins of giants. A new holographic display activated. A station near the Dominion Bayorden had just sent a distress signal. The footage was grainy, but the moment it played, an unnatural hush consumed the chamber. It was a fleet. A vast, endless armada of warships emerging from the dark void of space. Their designs were unfamiliar, yet there were elements, subtle, undeniable, that aligned with Terran architecture. Ships built for war, for conquest, for annihilation. The largest of them, a monstrous dreadnought, bore a name written in an ancient dialect. The translation flickered. Tedious Revenant. A name that spoke of ghosts. Of vengeance. The Galactic Council chamber was no longer a place of discussion. It had become a tomb of silent realization. The myths were real. The lost species of humanity had returned. And they had not come in peace. The bridge of the Dominion warship was a scene of barely contained panic. Officers hissed into communication links, issuing orders in desperate attempts to understand the impossible. The fleet had been mobilized in response to the distress signals from the frontier, expecting to face Raiden's or perhaps a rival empire's opportunistic strike. What they found instead defied reason. Before them, silhouetted against the abyss of space, an armada loomed, silent, massive, and unmistakably human. The Terran fleet stretched beyond their scanners' limits, a wall of warships crafted in designs unseen for millennia, their hulls reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Some bore the jagged scars of battles, others pulsed with energy signatures no Dominion scientist could decipher. Admiral, mandibles clicked in agitation as he watched the readouts. Every attempt to establish communication was met with silence. No demands, no threats, no warnings. Just cold, unwavering presence. He turned to his tactical officer, his four crimson eyes narrowing. Any response? None, Supreme Admiral. The officer's claws twitched over the console, fingers tapping with restrained nervousness. They refuse all hails. No translation errors. No interference. They simply ignore us. Plating flared slightly, a subconscious display of unease. Silence was an unfamiliar tactic in interstellar warfare. When the Dominion advanced, they announced their arrival with overwhelming force, demanding submission. When the Wheeler Dominion struck, their war hymns preceded them, vibrating through enemy channels like a storm's drumbeat. Even the synthetic core AI forces transmitted cold, logical ultimatums. But the humans, if these truly were humans, said nothing. A warning klaxon blared, and the ship's AI intoned. Unknown vessels have entered attack range. Awaiting orders. Forced his mandibles shut, his mind racing. The Dominion Navy was the strongest in the known galaxy. Their technology had been refined over countless cycles, their tactics honed through wars that had shaped entire civilizations. This fleet, no matter how large, was outdated. They should not be a threat. And yet, staring at the formation before him, he felt something he had not known in his long and brutal career: uncertainty. A junior officer spoke, voice tense. Supreme Admiral, our vessels are scanning them now. These readings, they don't make sense. Strode to the central display. Explain. The officer's gills flared as he struggled to find the words. Their ships, they don't match any known construction. They appear ancient, yet they are emitting energy signatures beyond anything on record. Some seem damaged, as if they have survived battles that should have left them wreckage. And their shields, he trailed off, his expression unreadable. What about their shields? Demanded. The officer hesitated before replying. They don't behave like shields at all. It's as if space itself bends around their vessels. Our targeting systems are struggling to lock onto them, as if they're not entirely here. Stiffened. Dominion scientists had long theorized the potential of armor, but no species had successfully developed it. If these Terrans had, if they had not only survived but advanced beyond known limits, then the Dominion was facing something they had not prepared for. Another alarm. Supreme Admiral, the fleet is moving. Turned sharply. The human ships advanced with eerie precision, shifting into a beta formation that suggested old Terran strategies, but refined, improved, perfected. The Dominion had faced countless foes, but none had ever fought like this. No wasted movement, no unnecessary adjustments. It was the march of a force that had spent eons mastering the art of war. A communication request flickered onto the display. For a moment, a breath of hope, perhaps diplomacy was still an option. Nodded to his communications officer. Put it through. The screen came to life, but there was no face, no figure. Only a symbol, an ancient sigil, unmistakable even across time. The insignia of old Earth's military forces. And then, at last, a voice. It was deep, layered with something unnatural, as if multiple voices spoke at once through a chasm of lost time. We do not seek words. Silence. Claws dug into his palms. Then what do you seek? The voice replied, cold and unwavering. Balance. Without further warning, the human fleet opened fire. The shields flared violently as impact after impact slammed against them. The Dominion had expected ballistic weapons, crude and plasma batteries. What they faced instead was something else entirely. Energy bursts twisted space itself upon impact, bypassing traditional defenses. Some shots did not explode but unmade, leaving voids where matter had once been. Barely had time to process what was happening before the Dominion's proud armada began to buckle and end the onslaught. Ships that had dominated the stars for centuries found themselves outmatched within moments. The formations they had relied on, the countermeasures they had perfected, none of it mattered. A cruiser to their starboard detonated, its hull splitting apart as energy tore through it with a force could not comprehend. Another vessel, a dreadnought second only to the, simply ceased to exist, its outline flickered, its structure collapsed inward, and then there was nothing. The Dominion fleet limped through the void, retreating at full speed toward the nearest warp corridor. Across the shattered armada, ships flickered with failing energy fields, their hulls scorched and torn. Once the pride of the Dominion war machine, now bore deep scars where entire sections had been erased by the incomprehensible weaponry of the human fleet. Within its command bridge, Supreme Admiral sat in silence, his mind reeling from the events that had just transpired. His species had conquered dozens of civilizations. They had crushed rebellions, eradicated threats, and rewritten history in their own image. Never had they encountered an enemy that simply ignored their dominance. Never had they seen a fleet fight as the humans had, as if war was not just survival but an art they had perfected beyond understanding. The thought sickened him. A Dominion tactician, his mandibles twitching in distress, interrupted the silence. Supreme Admiral, the humans, they are not pursuing us. Crimson eyes flicked toward the main tactical display. He already knew. Even now, as his forces fled in disgrace, the human fleet did not follow. They did not tempt, they did not harass. They merely watched. Their ships remained in perfect formation, a wall of silent judgment against the backdrop of the abyss. It was as if they had already won and did not see the need to press further. The very thought sent a tremor through the Admiral's frame. Status report, he ordered, keeping his voice level despite the turmoil within. The officer hesitated before responding, his spined crest lowering in a submissive display. Our fleet has lost over 70% of its vessels. Many of those remaining are severely damaged. Warp drives are fluctuating, but we should be able to reach the designated fallback point. We have never suffered losses of this scale before. Supreme Admiral did not respond immediately. He simply stared at the image of the human fleet. It was unnatural, their precision, their lack of hesitation. In every previous war, battles followed a script: attacks, counterattacks, attrition. There were openings, weaknesses, opportunities to exploit. Yet these humans had left nothing exposed. They had struck with ruthless efficiency, dismantling an entire battle group as if they were dissecting a corpse. Another officer turned toward him, his voice uncertain. What do we tell High Command? Exhaled slowly, his mind sifting through what little options remained. The truth was unthinkable. The Dominion had believed humans to be myths, a species lost to the tide of time, whispered about in ghost stories. Now they had returned, not as relics but as something greater, something evolved. The warlords of the Dominion would demand answers. They would want to know how the enemy had survived in the shadows of history and re-emerged with power beyond comprehension. They would demand retaliation, but had seen the truth in the void. Retaliation would mean extinction. The screen flickered, drawing all eyes to the communications array. An incoming transmission. The bridge fell deathly silent. No Dominion vessel had sent it. It came from them. A single pulse of energy rippled through the ship's systems, an archaic signal protocol that hadn't been used in thousands of years. The crew hesitated before patching it through. Forced himself to remain still as the main displayed its contents. A single image appeared, a desolate world, scarred and abandoned, its surface still glowing faintly from ancient destruction. Then another, a battlefield filled with shattered Dominion vessels, wreckage strewn across the orbit of some forgotten colony. More images followed, visions of conquest, of extermination, all carried out by the Dominion against weaker species across centuries. Then, the final image, Earth. Not as it was now, but as it had been. Burning. The meaning was unmistakable. Mandibles tightened as his crew recalled in disbelief. The humans remembered. Across the ages, across the silence, they had remembered everything. The war that the Dominion had assumed was over, the genocide they had written off as a necessary victory, it had never been forgotten. The ghosts of the past had returned, and they had come to balance the scales. A final line of text appeared on the screen, written in the Dominion language with unsettling precision. We remember. And then, the transmission ended. Close dug into his command chair, his mind spiraling with possibilities. The Dominion had believed themselves untouchable. They had rewritten history to erase the crimes of their past. But the past had not forgotten them. An eerie silence settled over the bridge as the crew processed the full weight of what had just transpired. The humans had not merely returned. They had been waiting, watching, preparing. And now, they had sent their message with devastating clarity. The Supreme Admiral finally stirred, his voice hollow. Prepare a full intelligence report. Every detail of this battle must be sent to High Command. His hesitated. Supreme Admiral, do you believe they will listen? Turned his gaze back to the screen, where the ghostly remnants of the transmission still lingered in his mind. The answer was clear. The warlords of the Dominion would not believe, not at first. They would dismiss, strategize, plan retribution. But had seen what lay beyond the veil of myth. The Dominion's War Council chamber was silent, the air thick with unease. High Warlord stood at the head of the assembly, his golden exoskeleton gleaming under the dim, pulsating lights of the chamber. Around him, the most powerful minds of the Dominion sat in a great circle, their expressions unreadable, though tension radiated from them in waves. They were warriors, conquerors, creatures who had spent their entire existence crushing civilizations beneath their heel. And yet, for the first time in living memory, they had no answers. The massive, at the center of the chamber flickered with the remains of the battle reports. The Dominion fleet, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had barely escaped annihilation. The losses were incomprehensible. Hundreds of warships reduced to drifting wreckage, thousands of their finest warriors lost. And worst of all, the enemy had not pursued. The humans had let them go, as if they were nothing more than defeated prey, unworthy of further attention. Mandibles twitched in controlled fury as he turned to the Supreme Admiral, who stood before the gathered warlords, his plates dull with exhaustion. Explain, demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. Explain to me how a species we believed extinct shattered an entire Dominion battle group. Voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, a weariness, a grim certainty. They were never extinct, warlord. They survived. They hid in the void, beyond the reach of our fleets, and they did not wither. They became something else, something more. One of the warlords, his claws flexing in agitation, scoffed. They are primitives. They were never capable of standing against us before. What changed? Gaze darkened. They learned. They adapted. They have studied us in ways we never imagined. They knew our weaknesses before we even entered battle. Our formations, our strategies, none of it mattered. They countered us as if they had fought us 1,000 times before. The chamber erupted into a chorus of disbelief and barely contained rage. Raised a clawed hand, silencing them with a single gesture. You speak as if they are now our equals, he said, his voice dangerously low. Hesitated before responding. No, warlord. They are not our equals. He exhaled, his mandibles clicking softly. They are beyond us. The chamber fell into stunned silence. None dared to speak. No one had ever uttered such a statement before, not about any species, much less when the Dominion had once believed to be extinct. Took a slow step forward, his red eyes burning with cold fury. Then we will adapt as well, he declared. We will rebuild our fleets, study their tactics, prepare for their return. The Dominion does not fall. We will not cower in the shadows. Did not move. He did not look away. You don't understand, he said quietly. They are not coming for conquest. This is not a war we can fight as we have before. Snarled. Then what is it? Hesitated for only a moment before he spoke the truth that had settled deep into his bones since that final transmission. It is judgment. The word sent a ripple through the chamber, a cold, undeniable truth sinking into the minds of even the most hardened warlords. Judgment. The humans had not returned as conquerors, nor as mere survivors seeking to reclaim lost power. They had come as something more. An ancient force, when that had endured its suffering in silence, growing in the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike. Another warlord, his voice uneasy, spoke. Then what do you suggest, Admiral? Surrender. Exhaled. I suggest we prepare for the inevitable. Mandibles clenched tightly. And what is inevitable? Turned his gaze toward the massive, where the final message from the humans remained frozen in time. Two simple words, written in perfect Dominion script. We remember. He looked back at, his voice steady, his fate already sealed in the weight of history. The storm is coming, warlord. And nothing in the galaxy will stop it.